Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you by Casper Mattresses. Right now, Three Martini Lunch listeners can get $50 off towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/lunch and using the promo code lunch at checkout. That's casper.com/lunch and using the promo code lunch at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Much more on that in just a moment. Jim, let's start with our good martini. And you and I have talked about this a couple different times. You've really been reporting at the cutting edge of this story, and that's criminal justice reform. You've had the opportunity to be out at the Koch Summit the last few years, and it's a major priority of theirs. So you've informed our listeners, and through your writings, obviously, about what's in this thing and why it could be very good for lowering recidivism and getting folks back into society and being more productive members of our society. And the good news today is that Mitch McConnell has agreed to a vote on this in the U.S. Senate. It's already passed the House. I don't know if the Senate version has made any changes that it would require to be voted on in the House again. But Mitch McConnell has agreed that this will happen in the lame duck session. And we're already getting some responses from those who have led on this. Rand Paul saying, having led the fight on criminal justice reform for the past 6 years, I applaud Senator McConnell for scheduling this very important vote. Lindsey Graham, great to hear he's committed to bringing up criminal justice reform. The votes are overwhelmingly there in both the House and Senate for criminal justice reform. Jim, as far as I know, Tom Cotton's the only one beating the drum against this bill. A lot of folks think it could get 80 or more votes in the U.S. Senate. So just how significant is the fact that Mitch McConnell's going to allow a vote here?
I think it's very significant for a couple of points. One being that, as you noted, Tom Cotton had really been the most strongest opponent of this legislation, basically arguing that there were sentence reductions involved and that struck him as being soft on crime. It's worth noting that there are two components to this. What I covered at the Koch Seminar Network meeting back in the winter was the big emphasis was on prison anti-recidivism programs. This was basically, they've already seen this happen in places like Texas and Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, ironically, pretty darn heavily red states. And they were pushed through to the likes of Rick Perry. In Kentucky, Matt Bevin was pushing for this sort of thing. And I kind of was interesting that Republican governors who had this reputation of being tough on crime were the ones who had the ability to make these things happen and who basically, just as only Nixon could go to China, only tough on crime Republicans could push for these kinds of ideas to basically take convicted felons. There's no illusion about who we're dealing with here, but that 90-some%, I believe it's 97%, will be released at some point. And so the question is, what kind of life do you want these people to be returning to? If you don't want them to come back to prison, then it probably makes good sense to have mentoring programs and job training programs, helping these guys get their GED, basically something that gives them options once they return out of prison to having a law-abiding and productive life. And there are a bunch of programs that have had very good success. It's worth noting they have not been in place for lots and lots of years, but the ones that have been in place say they've done a pretty good job of keeping people from going back to a life of crime. There's pretty broad support for this. Nearly a version of this got passed before Trump became president, and the senator who stopped it then was Jeff Sessions, who then, of course, went on to become Attorney General. Interesting debate between Tom Cotton and Mike Lee about the potential sentencing reductions and disparity efforts to reduce disparities and things like that. The other intriguing aspect is that Politico had reported this morning some reports that only 30 Republicans supported the legislation. And in fact, that there's some griping about John Cornyn and his vote counting, which usually he gets, rave reviews for that as the Senate whip. The idea that he was, either overestimating or underestimating the level of support. Whatever you think of this legislation, and I think it's got more good ideas in it than bad ideas, it is good to have the vote. You hate to see something like this die on the vine, not get a chance to at least be considered, and that the idea, the fact that McConnell's bringing it to the floor probably means he thinks there's votes to pass it, and this would not be a waste of time in the very busy schedule they have in the remaining, 19 days or so in the year. Also worth noting is that Rand Paul, you mentioned, supported the bill, did a big event in Kentucky, and despite past differences, Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell have a pretty good working relationship, and you can't help but wonder if Rand nudged McConnell in this direction. If this comes to fruition, it will be a major accomplishment for the administration, a major bipartisan accomplishment probably, which is not something you see very often. Jared Kushner, everyone I've talked to in this realm says that they've just been singing the praises of Jared Kushner, of doing the sorts of things you want to see in terms of shepherding big, complicated pieces of legislation and building a legislative coalition to support it. Also worth noting, Paul Ryan said that when the Senate passes their version, the House will be ready to bring that up and see if they can pass it quickly. So we could be on the verge of another major accomplishment, maybe the last major accomplishment of this administration before the Democrats take over the House. And so I think that's pretty good news for conservatives and just about everybody on this Tuesday morning, Greg.
Jim, you can choose to believe that Mitch McConnell was just responding to his caucus, but let's be honest here. A lot of the folks who might see lighter sentences are nonviolent drug offenders, and Cocaine Mitch might be helped out by that a little bit.
It's not just constituent service, Greg. It's customer service.
We should not joke about that in that way, but the nickname just left it hanging.
Too good to mess up.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, let's move on to sleeping well at night. That's hopefully what Jared Kushner and some others can do here, assuming this actually ends up passing. And if they want the best possible night's sleep, Casper Mattress is definitely the way to go. Casper is a sleep brand that makes expertly designed products to help you get your best rest one night at a time. The experts at Casper work tirelessly to make a quality sleep surface that cradles your natural geometry. I always love that line. In all the right places. After all, you do spend 1/3 of your life sleeping, so you should be comfortable.
The original Casper mattress combines multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with just the right amounts of both sink and bounce. Its breathable design helps you sleep cool and regulates your body temperature throughout the night. And Casper now offers two other mattresses, the Wave and the Essential. Now, the Wave features a patent-pending premium support system to mirror the natural shape of your body, and the Essential has a streamlined design at a price that will not keep you up at night. And remember, all Casper products are designed, developed, and assembled right here in the United States.
Even better, prices are affordable because Casper, they cut out the middleman and sell directly to you. Every single Casper mattress is delivered right to your door in a small how do they do that sized box. Plus, there's free shipping and hassle-free returns in both the U.S. and Canada. If that's not enough, you can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free sleep-on-it trial. And right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can get $50 off towards select mattresses by visiting Casper.com/lunch and using the promo code lunch at checkout. That's Casper.com/lunch and use the promo code lunch for $50 off select mattresses. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Jim, let's move now to our bad martini. Yesterday's crazy martini, or our third crazy martini of all crazies yesterday, was the list of 10 finalists for the Time Person of the Year. And now we have the winner, which was sort of from that list and sort of not, because they broadened it out. Ultimately, the person on the list that is going to be honored is Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist and Muslim Brotherhood figure from Saudi Arabia, who, by all reasonable evidence, seems to have been attacked and murdered in a very gruesome way in the consulate in Istanbul. Now Time Magazine is honoring guardians of truth, all sorts of different journalists who are either murdered or oppressed in some way as a result of their devotion to their craft. In addition to Khashoggi, there are the 2 journalists in Myanmar who have been imprisoned by Aung San Suu Kyi, which is just a bizarre story that deserves probably a lot more attention than we have time for here. There's a Filipino journalist, and then, of course, there's the staff at the Capital Gazette of Annapolis, Maryland, which didn't have a political component to it, but obviously those folks lost their lives, and the paper dutifully carried on and continued its responsibility of putting out a paper and so forth. Jim, as you so brilliantly pointed out in the corner today, the pick isn't really about Trump, but people will think it is.
Yeah, I found myself not annoyed by it. Look, it's a choice that's very easy to justify. The problem is that it's a little bit of a cheat for starters. When yesterday they just mentioned Khashoggi, and then they broadened it out to several journalists who represent the threat to journalism and the threat to free expression and reporting on the powerful all around the world. Again, I salute every one of those groups. They really do deserve it. What's interesting is that this is the kind of pick, and by touting journalists as the guardians, Sounds like a superhero team.
Right.
It sounds like a slam of Trump without really being a slam of Trump. And in fact, of course, a lot of folks who are tweeting about it, discussing it on social media said, this represents Trump's menace to the First Amendment and to journalism, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's a very different thing, I would argue, to kill a journalist the way the Saudi regime did, or to threaten to imprison them or to threaten their lives, as is done by the Philippine government, the Myanmar regime. I'd also point out drug cartels when people try to cover them in Mexico and places like that. Look, these are stories worth, lives worth celebrating, stories worth putting out there. But the thing is that what Trump does is not this, and it's not even close. In fact, folks may recall they couldn't even yank Jim Acosta's press pass for too long because there was too much outrage, and they backed down on it. And it's very interesting how I wrote about in the corner this idea that Trump is this menace to journalists. And I don't think necessarily that tweeting angry things makes you a menace, or at the very least, it shouldn't be on the same scale as executing them. Trump hasn't imprisoned anybody on this. What he does is he does a lot of name calling. And I wish we lived in a world where the president did not tweet out gifs that showcase him body slamming CNN by putting, the CNN logo over somebody's face from way back when Trump was doing professional wrestling. But in the end, doesn't this look kind of pathetic? Doesn't this look kind of impotent? Isn't this a demonstration that Trump really doesn't have any power to change what NBC or CNN or anybody else is doing? He says, he calls them the Amazon Washington Post, but you know what? Washington Post circulation is up. Denounces CNN all the time, but CNN's ratings are actually up over the last 2 years. If you think about Megyn Kelly, who he denounced all throughout the 2016 campaign as the cautionary tale, Greg, Megyn Kelly departed NBC News after some controversy, and some said the relationship didn't work out. But what was the payout, Greg? $66 million or something like that?
A lot of money.
If that's punishment, punish me more. So all in all, actually, the idea that Trump is a menace to the First Amendment or to American journalism, they have much higher circulation, much higher readership, much higher ratings. You could argue that he has re-energized American journalism, besides giving them a big fat target that they like to denounce every chance they get. So kind of a little bit of shell game, 3-card monte going from the Time magazine selection here. I salute the oppressed journalists, and I wish to be more of a spotlight on the work that they do around the world. I don't think people should say, and Jim Acosta is just like that.
No, not in the least. There's a big difference between what happened to Jamal Khashoggi and Jim Acosta getting his pass briefly suspended for asking a fourth question for CNN, which has, I believe, 3 or 4, if not more, other White House correspondents. So it's not exactly chilling in that way. Plus, I think if you compare it to the Obama administration with the way they treated James Rosen and the AP at various times and going after Rosen's parents' phone records, the rhetoric is annoying sometimes. I wish Trump would debate the media reporting on the facts instead of the ad hominems. But in terms of actual, real treatment of the press, Trump's probably better than Obama was.
In terms of legal threat to the world of journalism, the Obama administration was a bigger problem. Again, also worth noting, as much as I might not like mentioning Rosen as an unindicted co-conspirator and various subpoenas and things like that, again, it's a bit of a difference from what the threat that the cartels present or that we've seen in Myanmar or places like that. So, look, protect journalists, protect freedom of expression, protect journalism that holds the powerful accountable around the world. But let's not blur the line between what we have here in the United States and elsewhere.
All right, let's move to our crazy martini now, Jim. And, we just talked about the plight of some reporters around the world. They lose their freedom. Some lose their lives for trying to get the truth out there. And others are getting the vapors because of the demographics of the people allegedly on Trump's shortlist to be the next chief of staff. This is MSNBC. They had just had a report from one of their White House correspondents about Trump's hunt for a chief of staff to replace John Kelly. And Stephanie Ruhle and Ali Velshi not very happy with the fact that they notice a certain chromosome pattern and certain melanin pattern in the folks on the shortlist.
I want to note to you, you and I talk about business all the time. That's a major position. And the 6 people that they have put out that are shortlisted are all white guys. I cannot think of one single public company right now that if they had an open senior position like that or a board seat, You would never, in 2018, see that the short list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 white guys. That
right, even if you're not going to pick somebody else.
Correct.
Usually
Correct.
put them on the list just for...
But that isn't that stunning that the White House has no problem? Yep, these are our 6. If you saw a public company put out that list right now, they would get clobbered.
Oh, Jim, there's so many different ways to go with this. First of all, name me the female or minority chief of staff from any administration ever. So it's not like the Democrats were making inroads on this. Secondly, apparently Ali Velshi wants the Rooney Rule in administration appointments, which in some cases is more of an insult than an honor because they interview you just to make sure they comply with the league. I'm sure it's afforded some opportunities to others who may have not been part of the interview process. And of course, when there's a conservative woman up for a cabinet position, Betsy DeVos, for example, or a minority, Ben Carson, the mainstream press just love these people.
Look, Obama had Rahm Emanuel, who some might say is some sort of, Martian or something like that. But no, he's not a minority. Pete Rouse, Bill Daley, Jack Lew, Dennis McDonough, all a bunch of white guys. The Democratic administration before then, Bill Clinton had John Podesta, Erskine Bowles, Leon Panetta, Mac McClarty, all white men. Go back all through the Obama year, through the Reagan years, to the Bush years. Jimmy Carter had Hamilton Jordan, Jack Watson, both white guys. Gerald Ford had maybe the most influential and important chief of staff of all time. By that, I mean Dick Cheney. But before then, Donald Rumsfeld and Alexander Haig. H.R. Haldeman, okay, let's face it, they don't all turn out to be great ones. Would I like to see more gender and racial diversity in the Trump administration? Sure. You always want to, Bill Clinton had said back when he was appointing his cabinet, it's the cabinet that looks like America. And I believe that, almost all of them were lawyers and almost all of them had gone to Yale or somewhere in the Ivy Leagues. So these people have this idea of diversity in one form, but not necessarily in others. Look, would it be better to have more African Americans, Latinos, women, Asians, Americans in the cabinet? Sure. That would be great to see. But as you and I discussed yesterday, this is a position where you got a giant bullseye on your back, right? Traditionally, the White House chief of staff is this very glamorous and powerful position, but it's not in the White House, right? Reince Priebus got endlessly humiliated all the time. John Kelly looked like he was ready to tear his hair out, but he ended up not having much hair left by the time. But he stepped into the job, and what was left up on the head was being torn out on a regular basis as he made all the face palms and all that kind of stuff. Trump is unmanageable. So the first problem is that not a single right-thinking member of a minority group or woman would want this job. There are a whole bunch of white guys who don't want this job. Nick Ayers just turned it down, and Nick Ayers was seen as exactly the kind of ambitious guy who would find this to be enormously beneficial. So the first thing is the acknowledgement that, if Trump has failed in getting diversity in his chief of staff picks, fine, but the same thing applies to every preceding president. The second thing is that these 6 white guys, don't envy them, pity them. This looks like it's going to be a very difficult and unlikable job. And 3, I'm not sure these 6 are the best for the job, Greg. I'll just kind of observe. These are the best for the job who are willing to be considered, which it's not even a Venn diagram. It's a much smaller circle than the large circle of people who could make a good White House chief of staff. Anyway, that's where we are, America.
You must be thrilled that Chris Christie's allegedly a strong candidate is what we heard yesterday.
As weird as it is, Greg, I actually look at he's a guy who might. First of all, the possibility one is if you're White House chief of staff, one of your duties, and probably one of the reasons that Priebus and Kelly had so much difficulties is even in every presidency, the job of the chief of staff among them is to save the president from himself. If the president is making a mistake, you're in the best position to say, Mr. President, I think you're making a mistake, and here's why. And ideally, you have a president who listens to their White House chief of staff. It sounds like Trump doesn't like to be told that he's making a mistake and does not necessarily – nobody warmly receives criticism or warnings or something like that, but Trump is particularly difficult with that. Christie might be blunt enough to say so, and Christie might have enough stature and all that stuff. But apparently he has a fairly good relationship with Trump going back to the endorsement during the 2016 campaign. They've known each other many more years. Then maybe Christie would be the kind of guy who could bring a little bit of order and discipline and, get everybody singing from the same songbook and rowing in the same direction. Maybe he's the best possible option out there. Let's also acknowledge this White House is heading into some very choppy waters with Democrats taking the House. Mueller report's going to come out at some point. He might actually be the best option. Now, I would point out, though, Greg, that considering how exhausting and dispiriting and humiliating and just overall painful the experience has been for Reince Priebus and John Kelly. Greg, if you don't like Chris Christie, well, then by golly, you want to see him in that position as quickly as possible.
If he doesn't get the job, though, how many times has he been jilted? He was on the short list for VP, obviously didn't get that. I'm pretty sure he was in the mix for some cabinet-level position during the transition, obviously didn't get that. He was mentioned as a replacement for Jeff Sessions. That went to Bill Barr, and now he's being publicly floated as a possible chief of staff. So if he goes 0 for 5 or whatever it is, at what point does he start to wonder if Trump might just be playing him here?
Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. If I recall correctly, Christie was involved in the prosecution of Jared Kushner's father way back when. And the thinking is that Kushner has always held a grudge against that. And so as soon as Trump won, within a day, he was no longer running the transition and Pence was taking over. So it's one of those interesting things where he was running the transition for as long as nobody thought he was going to win and have to do any actual work. Once it became clear that, yes, that would be a very important job, they would end up changing that. If Kushner does hold that grudge, then, Christie may be put up for every single position and turned down at the last second every single time, if that still is in effect.
Wow. Yeah, if Christie had to work with Kushner on a day-to-day basis, Jim, I don't know. I don't know if we want drama in this White House.
I'm just going to say when Kushner decides to drive to work and all of a sudden back there's construction work going on right in front of his
Oh, that's good. A little bridge work.
Traffic problems in Colorama.
Yeah, you got a little bit of bridge work over DuPont Circle. You never know what problems can occur on that commute. Jim, fun as always. We'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget to visit our good friends over at Casper Mattresses. Right now, get $50 off towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/lunch and using the promo code LUNCH at checkout. And tune in Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.